Hilchos Shevuos Perek Chamishi, the Laws of Oaths, Chapter 5. Today we continue to explore the details of Shevuos Bitoy, the standard oath, the oath of expression, especially as it relates to making an oath that concerns other people's behavior. And after we're done with that, the chapter is going to cross over to Shevuos Shav, the useless oath, specifically one of the four categories of the useless oath, that one which is related to the fulfillment of mitzvahs. The Rambam told us in chapter 1 that it's forbidden to make an oath that goes against our obligation as part of keeping Torah and mitzvahs, since as Jews, we're all under oath since our acceptance of the Torah on Mount Sinai, what's called Mushba v'Oimed Mehar Sinai. Every Jew committed back then to fulfill everything it says in the Torah, so we're not allowed to make an oath that would have our behavior contradict that commitment. So we're going to get a lot of discussion on that, and it's going to segue towards the end of the chapter into some interesting crossover between Torah and science as it relates to the human capacity to go without food, and also the understanding of the planets, specifically the size of the sun relative to Earth, as we'll see in the end of the chapter. It says the Rambam, Halacha Aleph, Misha Nishba, Shazarak Ish Pleini Tzrer Layam. Someone makes an oath that his friend threw a stone into the ocean. I swear that my friend threw a stone into the ocean, V'hu loy zarak, and it turns out that the friend never threw the stone. Or the person makes the oath that his friend did not throw a stone into the ocean, and it turns out that he did. This person is liable on account of making a false oath of expression. Even though such an oath cannot be formulated in the future tense, for it's not within a person's capacity to make an oath that would force another person to throw or not throw a stone. So one might think that since the Torah's categorization, description of Shevuos Bitoy is that it has to be for the past or for the future, and in this case, when you're talking about somebody else's behavior, the only oath you can make is in the past, so perhaps we wouldn't be held liable when it's discovered that our oath is false. Says the Rambam, no. As long as the oath that you made was false, you're held liable. But indeed, if anybody makes an oath concerning someone else that they do such and such or not do such and such, even if the person in question was your own son or your own wife, and there would be more room to think in some way that you control their behavior, according to halacha, we're not liable for making a false oath of expression. Because the person making the oath doesn't have the authority to have his oath be fulfilled. He can't force behavior on someone else, nor does he have the authority to make it nullified in the sense of having the other person purposely ignore the oath. You don't have control over someone else's behavior. Nevertheless, even though we're not going to hold you biblically accountable, the rabbis will give you rabbinic lashes, because for this very same reason that you cannot force your oath to be fulfilled, you've basically, in effect, caused a useless oath to be made. You've caused an oath to be made in vain because it's an oath which cannot definitely be fulfilled. Now, why are we only considering you somebody who causes an oath in vain? Why don't we directly give you lashes for somebody who makes a useless oath? Since you can't guarantee that it's going to be fulfilled, shouldn't that by default mean you just made a useless oath? Says the Rambam, no, because it's not entirely impossible. It's very possible that the person listening to you make the oath about them will be nice to you, listen to what you say, and fulfill your oath. And therefore it would turn out, if somebody would be standing next to the person making the oath, warning him against it. You're about to hear somebody make an oath to control someone else's behavior. The witness would say, hey, you can't make such an oath because what you're about to do is causing an oath in vain. That warning, which usually is the catalyst for causing punishment, the only time a person can be held liable for punishment is if he has witnesses warning him. When the witness warns him in this case, hasra safek she'ein loikin aleh. It's what's called a doubtful warning, which cannot warrant getting lashes. Because when you gave the warning, you weren't sure that what he was about to do was definite prohibition. Maybe somebody was going to hear and indeed fulfill the condition of the oath, thereby making the oath retroactively a true oath. So the warning that was issued wasn't a definite warning, And when you're not a definite warning, you don't get lashes. Unless the prohibition in question was explicit in the Torah, as will be explained in the 14th book of the Rambam, in the laws concerning the courts. Now, the Rambam's wording implies two things. First of all, that he talks more about this concept in the laws of Sanhedrin. And secondly, that the issue at hand, swearing falsely, is a prohibition which is not explicit in the Torah. The commentaries question the Rambam on both counts. First of all, in the laws of Sanhedrin, we don't find much about this topic. It's only mentioned once in the entire 26 chapters of the laws of Sanhedrin. Secondly, swearing falsely seems to be pretty explicit in the Torah. It's a matter of fact one of the 10 commandments, as we learned in chapter 1. So if, when we're dealing with explicit prohibitions, even doubtful warnings are significant, then why should this case be any different? The Radvaz, one of the primary commentators on the Rambam, explains that although the general prohibition of swearing falsely or swearing in vain is explicit in the Torah, this specific case of controlling somebody else's behavior is not. And that's what the Rambam means, that the case at hand, the specific case at hand, has to be one discussed in the Torah, which this is not. As far as the fact that the Rambam doesn't talk much about it in the laws of Sanhedrin, I'll leave that to the listeners to look up. I haven't found a satisfactory explanation for that, but one could say that the Rambam is just referring to his mention of it, at least the mention of the topic of Hasra Safek later in the Rambam's work. Says the Rambam, you should know, even though the other person listening to the oath could be nice and fulfill the oath to make the person's oath retroactively true, it's not an obligation. The other people aren't required to fulfill the words of the person making the oath, unless, of course, they answered Amen, as we saw in the beginning of chapter 2, that you can accept somebody else's oath upon yourself when you verbally express that. But otherwise, there's no obligation. If they fulfill the words and make the oath come true, of course they're going to be praiseworthy. This way they didn't cause or habituate somebody to make oaths in vain, but there's no obligation. Halacha Dalid says the Rambam, a general caveat. When do we say that a person is not allowed to make an oath which controls others' behavior? If the oath is concerning a matter which indeed is not under his authority. For example, Ruvain, proverbial Reuben and Shimon are always the people used in halacha. Ruvain makes an oath over Shimon that Shimon should not go to business, shouldn't travel abroad for commercial reasons, or shouldn't eat meat. You have no control over what Shimon can or cannot do. So the oath you uttered is exactly this kind of oath, which is not really allowed. Avalim nishba Ruvain. But if Ruvain made an oath over Shimon, saying that Shimon cannot come into his house, into Ruvain's house, or Shimon cannot derive any benefit from Ruvain's possessions, and Shimon transgresses, goes into Ruvain's house, enjoys the possessions of Ruvain without his consent, Reuven Potter, Reuven is going to be held exempt, Sharehu Onus. Was beyond his control. He wasn't aware. He couldn't stop Shimon from coming in. Shimon came in when he wasn't around. The Shimon Chayav. Shimon, however, is going to be obliged, is going to be held liable under this oath, even though seemingly Reuven made an oath over his behavior which he can't control, because in the final analysis, he transgressed something which was forbidden to him to do, because Reuven was completely in his rights when he made this oath, since the matter to which the oath pertained was indeed in his authority. It's my house. It's my property. I can decide who comes in and who doesn't. I can decide who enjoys it and who doesn't. So I have the right to include you, somebody else, in that prohibition. And anything similar to this case, the same laws would apply. The commentaries raise an interesting issue, which is, I mentioned this to you in the beginning of chapter 1, that there's a big difference between shvuah, an oath, and a neder, a vow. A shvuah, an oath, is always directed at a person, what's called in the yeshiva terminology the gavra, the individual. A vow, a neder, is directed at an object. The prohibition lands on the object. Here, the reason why Reuven is in his rights not to allow other people into his property is not because he has control over the person's behavior. It's because he has full autonomy over his property. And so the oath that he utters, not allowing Shimon to come into his property, would seem to not be a shvuah at all. It would seem to be a neder. It would seem to be a vow, a verbal expression which dictates the terms by which an object may or may not be used. So it seems improper, the commentaries raise the issue, to include this in the category of shvuah. Indeed, one of the commentators on the Shulchan Aruch says that this is a case of shvuah shehitziah b'lashon neder, an oath which was expressed using the formulation of a vow. It's only an oath because he intended it to be an oath. But in the language he would have to use would have to be that of a vow directed at the property. At any rate, that's the laws governing when an oath can control someone else's behavior and when it cannot. Now we turn to an issue which is still in the realm of Shevuos Bitui, standard expression, but is going to immediately cross over into one of the areas of Shevuos Shav, a useless oath since it relates to violating a mitzvah in the Torah. Says the Rambam halacha hey, Shevuah shaloi oichal. A person makes an oath, he says, I swear I won't eat. V'achal ochlin she'einon re'uyin la'achila v'shasa mashkim she'einon re'uyin l'shasiyah. And he goes ahead and he eats things that are not edible, or he drinks liquids that are not really drinkable. Potter, you're exempt. The reason you're exempt is because while you ate something, it's not considered eating by the Torah standards. You haven't eaten something edible. What if he ate completely edible things, but things that are dictated by the Torah to be forbidden? He ate an olive-sized portion of an animal that was slaughtered in an unacceptable way, an animal which got a mortal wound, an insect, a rodent. Pater mishum Shevuos Bitui. Here too you're exempt. Even though you ate completely edible things, you're exempt for a different reason. The reason that you're exempt is because the principle I mentioned before in the beginning in my introduction, that every Jew is mushba v'oimed mihar Sinai. We're under oath not to eat these things. So when you took the additional oath not to eat anything, that oath doesn't take effect on the already prohibited substances of the nevelas and the treifas. Though it is interesting why this wouldn't be similar to the case we learned yesterday, where in your oath you included more things, and because you included more things, it should also apply to the originally prohibited things in this case as well. You said, I'm not going to eat anything, so it should go over and above the already prohibited foodstuffs and therefore apply again to the nevelas and the treifas. Nevertheless, the Rambam says you're exempt for Shevuos Bitui. That's if a person said, I swear I won't eat, and he violated the oath by eating inedible things or forbidden foods. What if it's the opposite? Shevuah she'oichal. He made an oath that he's going to eat. I swear I will eat. V'ochal oichlin she'einon re'uyin la'achila v'shasa mashkin she'einon re'uyin l'shasiyah or she'ochal nevelos u'treifas v'chayetza ben. And then he eats foods that are inedible, or he drinks liquids that are indrinkable, or he eats forbidden foods. Pater mishvuos bitui. In this case as well, you're exempt, you're not liable for violating an oath of expression. In other words, here we pull the pendulum to the other side and we say, bottom line is, bottom line is you have eaten something. Once you've attached importance to them, importance enough to ingest them, that's enough for us to classify your act as eating. And with regards to the fact that mushba v'oimed, with regards to the fact that he is under oath not to eat such things, the argument cannot be made because his oath didn't say, I'm going to eat forbidden foods. If a person is going to eat forbidden foods, that's a useless oath to begin with. Here he said, I'm making an oath that I'm going to eat. You can fulfill that oath to eat by eating forbidden foods. Because by eating forbidden foods, you give them importance enough to be considered eating to fulfill your oath. Halacha vav, shvuah shaloi achalti. Another scenario. These two were in the future. Now we're going to the past. I make an oath that I never ate. I didn't eat today or yesterday, whatever. Turns out that indeed he did eat things that are inedible or forbidden foods. Chayav, you're liable, you lied. The fact that you had eaten them is considered by the Torah as eating, since you gave them importance in the fact that you already ate them. So they can be classified as an act of eating on your part. So when you say you made an oath that you never ate, they are in violation of that. And therefore you're liable. But if it was in the future, if you swore you're not going to eat, and it happened that you did eat them, then we're going to go and use the principle that eating inedible things is not considered eating, and it's going to exempt you as we just explained. A person makes an oath, I'm not going to eat even the tiniest amount of forbidden meat by the Torah. Now, in the Torah's prohibition, you only get lashes if you eat an olive-sized portion. Everything forbidden in the Torah of food always revolves around an olive-sized portion. Your oath, however, forbade even more than the Torah. It forbade even the tiniest substance of these forbidden foods. So then, when a person eats less than an olive-sized portion, and he runs against his oath, he's liable on account of the false oath that he just made. You cannot say that he's already under oath from Mount Sinai, because he's only under oath from Mount Sinai not to eat an olive-sized portion. Here he put himself under a new oath, not even the tiniest amount. That's a new oath which can work over and above the Mount Sinai oath, and therefore he's liable when he eats that smallest amount. Now, the commentaries questioned Rambam here. The Rambam said already a few times in his book that chatzi shir asher min haTorah, the idea of consuming less than the required substance, while it won't get you punished, it's still forbidden biblically. So why are you saying that it's not mushba v'oimed mehar Sinai? So the Rambam, the commentaries explain that, kind of like what we said earlier in the beginning of this chapter, that if it's not clear in the Torah, it doesn't fall into the category of the oath of Mount Sinai. The oath of Mount Sinai was only made for everything explicit in the Torah. Chatzi shir, the concept of less than the required substance, is not clear in the Torah, and therefore you're not under oath. And your new oath about the tiny amounts can be introduced and take effect over and above the Torah's oath. Halacha ches. Shevuos she'oichal pachis mikazayis nevelo treifa. A person makes an oath, he says, I swear I'm going to eat less than an olive-sized portion of forbidden foods. Essentially, I'm going to do something that's not clearly forbidden by the Torah. Chayav b'shvuas bita, says the Rambam, if he goes and acts against this oath, he's going to be held liable for making an oath of expression which he hadn't kept. Even though it would seem to run counter to the obligation of the Torah not to eat forbidden foods, but again, the obligation is only to eat an olive-sized portion. Here, he obligates himself to eat less than the olive-sized portion. The commentaries actually say that the most ideal scenario here would be to have his oath nullified. As we'll learn tomorrow, a person has the power to nullify an oath. But if it's not possible to nullify the oath, the Radvaz says, it's better to violate the commandment, in other words, keep your oath and eat that small amount, even though it goes against the biblical prohibition, because less than the required amount, and because of the stringency of the concept of an oath. Shevuos shelo yochal ofar. If somebody makes an oath, he says, I swear I'm not going to eat dirt or other inedible things. A person eats the olive-sized portion of these inedible things, he's liable, because he clearly made it important in his oath by removing himself from it. When you said, I'm not going to eat dust, when you eat a dust, you've gone against your oath. What if he consumes less than what's usually called eating in the Torah? Less than an olive-sized portion. Here is a suffix. Here it's a doubt. There's room to say that he should be held liable even for the smallest amount, because dust isn't something that's normally eaten to therefore have a required amount. Perhaps once you cross the threshold from edible to inedible, at any amount it's going to be considered to be eating for whatever your eating is worth. And therefore, if you say, I swear I'm not going to eat dust, even the smallest consumption of dust will run directly opposite that oath and will hold you liable. So it's a doubt. Halacha tes v'chein hanishba shelelechel chartzan. Same thing, a person makes an oath, he's not going to eat a grape seed. If he eats less than an olive-sized portion of a grape seed, then it's a doubt. Because maybe, since grape seeds are in essence not edible, when you declared your oath on that, even the smallest amount would run in contradiction to the oath. The reason why the Rambam singles out grapeseed is because there is one case where it could take a new shape. And that is for somebody who grape seeds are expressly forbidden, the Nazir, the Nazirite. We're going to have a whole section of laws in this book about him. If the person making the oath was a Nazirite, shehu asur bechartzan b'kazayis, in which case he is forbidden to eat grape seeds. But he's also forbidden only by an amount of an olive size. If he eats less than an olive-sized portion of the grape seeds, he's not obligated at all. There's no doubt about him, because he's functioning from within the perspective of a Nazirite. When he declares his oath, he only has in mind the regular olive-sized portion for which he is under oath by the vow, by his Nazirite vow. So his additional oath, I swear I'm not going to eat a grape seed, doesn't take effect. Therefore, in Peidash v'amar Shevuos shelo echal chartzan echad, were the Nazirite to be specific, explicit, and say, I swear I'm not going to eat even one seed, v'achal echaya, then if he eats it, he'd be liable, because this oath would be over and above his regular Nazirite oath. His Nazirite oath binds him not to eat an olive-sized portion of grape seeds. Now he says, I'm not going to eat even one grape seed. He's making a more inclusive, more encompassing oath, and he would be liable for just eating that one grape seed. Halacha yut. A person makes an oath, I'm not going to eat dates and forbidden foods. Even if he just eats an olive-sized portion of the forbidden food, the forbidden meat, you're liable for the oath of expression. Because in the language of your oath, you included forbidden things with permitted things. Like we explained the other day, when your new oath encompasses more things that your previous oath didn't encompass, the new oath encompasses everything. So here too, you are under oath not to eat forbidden meat from Sinai already. When you added the dates, that's the new material, and because the oath lands on the new material, the oath lands as well on everything else. But if all you would say was, I swear I'm not going to eat forbidden meat, like the Torah says, then whether you ate or whether you didn't eat, there's no liability for the oath at all. Not an oath of expression, not a useless oath, because you've basically just repeated the oath that already exists. The oath that you have not to eat forbidden meats. This is, by the way, about negative commandments. We're going to see in chapter 11 that a person may make an oath also to do a positive commandment. Nishba l'kayim es mitzvah. You made an oath to fulfill the mitzvah. There's even a source for that in Tehillim to do that, as we'll see in chapter 11. Halacha Yud Beis, Nishba sheyechal nevelo trefa b'chayetze ben meisudei Torah. If a person makes an oath in direct contradiction to his obligation from the Torah, he swears he's going to eat forbidden meat or any other biblical prohibition. At this moment, you get lashes for making a useless oath, bein achal, bein le'achal, no matter what happens later. Whether you eat, you don't eat. The oath itself was an oath in vain because you're running against your oath from Sinai. And here is where we cross from Shevuos Bitoy into the realm of Shevuos Shav. Says the Rambam, Halacha Yud Gimel, Shevuos sha'eichal kikar zu, Shevuos shelo yeichlena. A person says, I swear I'm going to eat this loaf, and immediately following that he says, I swear I'm not going to eat it. Hashniya Shevuos Shav. The second oath is automatically a useless oath. Shari mitzvah alav la'achla, because by dint of the first oath, he has a commandment to eat it, and now that he's declared I'm not going to eat it, that oath was made in vain. It's an oath against the mitzvah. Regardless of whether he eats the loaf or not, he gets lashes for the second oath. If he didn't eat it, thereby also going against his first oath, you're liable also for a regular oath of expression for not fulfilling your standard oath. If the words were uttered in the opposite order, he first said, I swear I'm not going to eat this loaf. And then he said, I swear I'm going to eat it. Same thing, the second oath is an oath in vain, because it's forbidden for him to eat the loaf by dint of the first oath. So the second oath goes against a mitzvah. And for the second oath, you get lashes regardless of whether you ate it or not. And if you do eat it, going against your first oath as well, you get lashes for a second time on account as well of the standard oath which you have violated. Similarly, if somebody makes an oath to nullify a mitzvah, and he ends up not nullifying the mitzvah, patur mishvuas bitoy, you're exempt for the standard oath which you made. But you do get lashes for uttering the oath itself. You weren't supposed to utter an oath which has you nullify a mitzvah. It's a useless oath. And rather you must do the mitzvah that which you swore to do. And do the mitzvah which you swore to nullify. So basically it cut on both ends. You have to do the mitzvah, but for doing the oath, you get lashes. Halacha tezvav keitzad, what would be an example of somebody who swore to nullify a mitzvah and then has to do it? A person makes an oath, I'm not going to make a sukkah this year. I'm not going to wear tefillin. I'm not going to give charity. Or somebody swears to his friend, I'm not going to testify for you the testimony which I know about that can help you in your case. Or in the future, if I find out any testimony which can help you, I'm not going to say it in court. You get lashes for a useless oath because you're actually commanded. You're bound by a commandment to testify when you know. A person tells his friend, I swear I will never know any testimony about you. That's a useless oath. It's not in your control not to find out testimony. Maybe you'll hear testimony one day. Then you'll transgress your oath. And so the same thing applies in any similar situations in which you would be held liable for making a useless oath. A person makes an oath to fulfill a mitzvah. Just doubling down on his biblical obligation. And he ends up not doing the mitzvah. Pater mishum Shevuos bitoy. He's exempt for the oath of expression because the oath of expression was taken over and above his obligation which he already has from Sinai. So it doesn't really take an effect. And therefore you won't hold him liable for that second count, only for whatever the Torah holds him liable for. Keitzad, what would be an example of this? A person makes an oath, he's going to make a lulav. He's going to make a sukkah this year on Sukkot. I'm going to give charity to the poor. I'm going to testify for my friend if I know testimony. And in the end, he doesn't come through. Didn't make the lulav, didn't make the sukkah, didn't give the charity, didn't say the testimony. He's exempt for contradicting his own oath of expression. Because the whole oath of expression can only be applicable in a case of optional matters. So that if he wants, he can do. If he doesn't want, he doesn't have to do, or he won't do. As it says in the verse, which describes Shevuos bitoy, that you're doing it for the bad or for the good. Something which you have the authority to do bad or to do good. Mitzvahs you don't. So therefore, the Shevuos bitoy doesn't apply to the extent of holding you liable. Therefore, once on the topic of this doing bad and doing good, if anybody swears in a way that would obligate him to harm others, pater mishvuas bitoy, he would be exempt from the oath of expression. For example, a person would swear he's going to hit a friend, or curse him, or rob his money, or hand him off to a terrorist. Because in this case, he's commanded not to do such things, and you're swearing to do them. That's not a Shevuos bitoy, can't apply to that. Ali says that Rambam, it seems to me that in this case he should also get lashes for making a useless oath. The reason why that I'm going to say it seems to me, even though he clearly went against the mitzvah here, is because all the examples in chapter 1 of making an oath to go against the mitzvah are between man and God. This would be an example of a mitzvah between man and man. So the Rambam uses his logic to derive that one would apply to the other, but he writes V'yeru Ali, it seems to me, because it doesn't have a clear Talmudic source. Halacha Yud Zayin, Nishba l'hara la'atzma, a person makes an oath to do bad to himself. He's going to inflict some self-harm. He swears he's going to wound himself. Even though he's not allowed to do so, the oath does apply to him. And if he indeed doesn't choose to inflict the self-harm, he's held liable on account of making an oath of expression which he violated. If he swears to do good to somebody, an action which he has the possibility to do, to speak, to intercede on behalf of him to the government, or to show him some kind of honor. Shvuah chalal, of the oath applies to him. And if he transgresses and doesn't fulfill his commitment, then he's held liable for making an oath of expression which he did not keep. Halacha Yudches, an interesting case of oath concerning a mitzvah. Nishba shelo yochal matzah shana oish nasayim. A person makes an oath, he's not going to eat matzah for a year or two. Since his oath encompassed the entire year, he becomes bound by this oath and prohibited to eat matzah even on Passover night. And if he does eat, fulfilling his mitzvah to eat matzah on the Seder, he is held liable for transgressing his oath of expression. The initial oath is not considered to be a useless oath. He never made a direct oath that I'm not going to eat matzah on Passover night. He included times where eating matzah is optional with a time where it's a mitzvah. And because the oath applies to the other days, it also applies to Passover night. And the same would apply to any other case like this, like somebody who swears that he'll never, ever sit in the shade of a sukkah. So he's also bound and prohibited to sit in the shade of a sukkah during the 7 days of Sukkot. Or a person who makes an oath that he's never going to wear clothes for a year or two, this is going to force him to violate a mitzvah. Which mitzvah will it force him to violate? So the seeming one would be tzitzit, but it's not really true because there's no real obligation to wear tzitzis. Only if you have a four-cornered garment, then you have to wear tzitzis. So some of the commentaries point that perhaps we're talking about a kohen, a priest, who every priest had to serve in the temple at least once a year. And when you serve in the temple, you have to be wearing certain garments, big day kahuna, which we actually had in the last week's Torah portion, tetzaveh. So by making the oath that he's not going to wear clothes for a year or two, that oath will be binding even when he's supposed to go serve in the temple, and he will not be allowed to wear the holy clothes. And if he does, he's violating his oath. There's a big discussion here why the Rambam, when it comes to sukkah, uses the word forever. And when it comes to matzah, he only says a year or two. Seemingly the same principle. The guy says, I'm not going to sit in a sukkah for 2 years. So it should be the same thing. He should also be bound by the oath when it comes to Sukkot, because saying I'm not going to sit in a sukkah all year is much more encompassing than not sitting in the sukkah on Sukkot. The Rogatchover Gaon deals with this issue, and he suggests that there's a major difference between matzah and sukkah. Sukkah is a type of mitzvah which you're required to worry about pre-Sukkot, because there are many laws that govern how a sukkah can be made and that it has to be made. You cannot have a sukkah that's made de facto. It's called tasav alei mina asui. You have to make the material of a sukkah. You can't have it made automatically. Let's say you can't dig a hole in a haystack and now your sukkah is there. You have to actively make the walls and make the covering. So since the laws that govern the making of a sukkah also tell you that it has to be made, so the mitzvah to sit in a sukkah extends beyond the time of the basic fulfillment of the mitzvah. Therefore, just saying I'm not going to sit in a sukkah all year doesn't really encompass more than what sukkah itself encompasses, because sukkah itself encompasses being busy with it all year. Versus matzah is an obligation that's solely applicable during the time frame of Pesach. There's no requirement of course there's rules that govern how to make it, but there's no rule specifically that part of the mitzvah is that it has to be made. When you make it, you got to make a certain way. But the mitzvah itself isn't that it has to be made, and therefore the mitzvah is only to eat it on the night of Pesach. So once you said I'm not going to eat matzah for a year, that already encompasses more than the mitzvah of matzah itself encompasses. And the Rebbe notes that, of course, the Rogatchover is not saying that you don't have an obligation to see to it that you have matzah prepared. The point is only that in essence, inherently, the mitzvah is different. The mitzvah of sukkah has to be, or spreads out also to its making, and the matzah does not. Halacha Yutes. Nishba shehiniach tefillin hayom olei hiniach. Shenisatif betzitzis olei nisatif. A person makes an oath that he put on tefillin today, or that he didn't put on tefillin today. Or he makes an oath that he wore tzitzis today, or he didn't wear tzitzis today. This is considered an oath of expression, a standard oath in the past. Shazem magid davar shenasa. He's talking about something that happened. It doesn't go into the category of oaths relating to mitzvahs, because this is an action that already happened. He didn't make an oath about a mitzvah to do or not to do it in the future. He's talking about past facts. Past facts, even as they relate to mitzvahs, are in the category of Shevuos Bitoy. Halacha chav, nishba shelo yishan shleishes yamim, shelo yechal klum shivas yamim, v'chayetze b'zeh. If a person makes an oath not to sleep for 3 days, or not to eat anything for 7 days, shehi shvuas shav, which, as we said in chapter 1, is a useless oath, because it's impossible for a human to do this. Ein oimrin, we do not say, Yeyar zeh ad sheyitztayer, v'yotzum ad sheyitztayer, v'lo yiyah b'koyach lisber. Let's first have him keep whatever he could of the oath. Let him stay up till he's in severe pain. Let him fast till he's in severe pain. And then, when he has no more strength to tolerate it, then let him eat or sleep. No. Once it's a useless oath, the whole oath is nullified. The court would see to it that he gets lashes right away for violating the prohibition of an oath in vain. And then he can eat and sleep whenever he wants. Just interesting facts over here. For sleeping, what I mentioned in chapter 1, that there's a world record of not sleeping for 11 days. But I guess, Torah l'reiv tadaber, Torah speaks about the majority. For fasting, though, even today, the modern thought, there's no conclusive study on it, but the modern thought is that about a week is the time that a person can survive without any food or water, like the Rambam says. Although there is a story in 1979, there was a guy who was arrested in Austria and was placed into a holding cell, and the police forgot about him, and for 18 days, he didn't eat or drink a thing. And they found him basically dead. And he holds the world record by default of the longest time surviving without food or water. However, there's a bit of a difference there, because the way he survived was the condensation on the walls. He would ingest the condensation. So in a way, he was going with some water of some sort, some liquid entering his body. But perhaps without food or water at all, we can still go with the Rambam's amount of a week. The Rambam here in this halacha compares eating and sleeping. The Ran, Rabbi Nissim, famously questions the comparison of the two. He says, sleeping, you don't have control over it. Once your body is tired enough, you'll fall asleep, whether you like it or not. With fasting, you have the power to fast until your soul expires. So perhaps, yes, when it comes to the oath of sleeping, the court would give you lashes and go to sleep right away because it's a completely useless oath. But when it comes to fasting, maybe we should say, like the Rambam originally posits, maybe we should say that you should suffer, fast until you can't anymore, and then we'll let you eat. And some, on the basis of the Ran's differentiation, want to say that perhaps this connects to a greater debate in what's called the Geder of Pikuach Nefesh. What's the definition when we say that everything in the Torah is suspended for life and death issues? Does that mean that it's suspended, like the word implies, suspended but not lifted entirely, or the Torah's prohibitions go away entirely? According to the Ran, Pikuach Nefesh is just dechuya. It just suspends the prohibitions. But any case where you can go and fulfill it to whatever extent, then fulfill it. So go and fast until you can't, and then when you can't, when actually life and death meet, we'll let you choose life. But according to the Rambam, Pikuach Nefesh is hutra. That means when life and death clashes with the Torah is completely lifted. And therefore, when a person makes such an oath, since it's going to reach a point of life and death situations, the whole oath is lifted. The whole oath doesn't matter. That's what some want to say. However, the Rebbe has a fascinating letter where he writes that one cannot prove that from this piece of Rambam. While it may be evident from other halachas in the Rambam's work, from here you can't prove it. The Rambam is not trying to tell us the nature of how the oath is lifted. He's letting us know that this is a Shevuos shav. This is a useless oath. One of the 4 categories of useless oath was when you make a commitment to do something which you cannot do. You cannot go without food or water for 7 days. Who cares what the nature is if you're going to fast for more or for less? The bottom line is it's davar she'efshar l'kaimai. If it's davar she'efshar l'kaimai, then it's a Shevuos shav. And that's the Rambam's point, that you get lashes right away, and then as soon as you get lashes, you're off the hook, so you can go eat and sleep whenever you want. Chaf Aleph. Nishba shara gamal pereach ba'avir. A person makes an oath that he saw a flying camel. Amru loy, somebody then challenged him, Heach nishbata lashav. He says to him, how do you make a useless oath? The Amar, so he immediately clarifies, no, I know that camels don't fly. Oif gadol ra'isi, umi gadol krasiv gamal. I saw a massive bird. Because it was so massive, I called it a camel. That's what I meant. And that's what was in my mind when I made this oath. I meant a bird as big as a camel. Ein zeklum. That's not a clarification. She'ein kol adam karin gamal legamal. You don't use camel to exaggerate a bird's size. You use camel to describe a camel. Ubat la daita etzel kol adam, and therefore your intent is considered not relative to the intent of most of humanity. The loika, and you get lashes for making a useless oath. V'chein kol kayetze bezeh, and the same thing in any other case. Your clarification has to be within reason, what most people consider to be reasonable. If no one would say this, what you're saying right now, so you're a minority and you don't count. Chav Beis, the Rambam concludes the chapter with a very interesting law. Davar yadua etzel hachachamim ba'alei seichel umada. It's a well-known fact by the sages who have intellect and are aware of the sciences, shahashemesh gedola min haaretz mea v'shivin pa'amim, that the sun is 170 times larger than the earth. And before we get to the law, let's just put something in here. Modern science puts the sun at about 800,000 times larger than the earth. So what does this mean, 170? So the Rebbe, in a letter, explains that what we have today as modern science is the volume of the sun. The volume of the sun is indeed hundreds of thousands times larger than the earth. The Rambam is referring to diameter. The diameter of the sun is 170 times that of the earth. Now, in today's modern science, the number typically given is 110. The diameter of the sun is 110 times larger than the earth, but the Rebbe says that's not a big issue because there's debate as to what layers of the sun are considered to be part of the sun. The sun has multiple layers. It has the core, the convective zone, the radioactive zone, photosphere, the chromosphere, and then you have what's called the corona, or the prominence, protuberance, different names for it. The point is there's the sun's core, and there's all these gases that express from it that may or may not be considered part of the sun. So the Rebbe says when you say 110, you're including more of the core elements of the sun. When the Rambam says 170, he's referring to all the gas and all the stuff that extends from the sun, which could extend up to 170 times the diameter of Earth. At any rate, that's what the Rambam seems to mean over here. So the bottom line is that scientifically speaking, the sun is much larger than the Earth. Nishba echad min ha'am sha'ashemesh gedola min ha'aretz. So what happens now if a person makes an oath, a regular guy, not a chacham, not a sage. Regular guy makes an oath, I swear the sun is larger than the earth. One of the categories of useless oath was stating the obvious. If you state the obvious, you should seemingly be under the category of useless oath. It says the Rambam, it's not obvious. You don't get lashes for making a useless oath. Even though the matter is as he says, this matter is not well known, not revealed to most people. Only to the major sages. Of course, today maybe the law would change because most people are aware of this. But definitely in the Rambam's times, it wasn't considered common knowledge. You're only liable for stating the obvious if you make an oath over something which is so well known to at least three regular common folk. Like a man is a man, a stone is a stone. Same thing in the opposite. If a regular guy who's unaware says, I swear the sun is smaller than the earth, you don't get lashes. Even though it's not true. And one of the types of useless oaths was contradicting reality. Seemingly this man is stating something which is against reality. Says that it's not a well-known fact to most people. It's not really like swearing that a man is a woman. The person making the oath could very well have been going after what his eyes see. He sees the sun, it's smaller than the earth. Maybe that's what he based his intel on. Since it's not well known, we can't hold him accountable for that. And the same would apply to all things related to the calculations of seasons and the constellations and geometry, or any other topics of wisdom, which are only known to specific individuals, that cannot go into the category of well-known reality that if it's contradicted or restated, it would be considered a useless oath. Instead, these cases would be exempt.